Welcome to Sound Heights Records. This is Yisroel Arye.
This has been really amazing to get your email today, and you were mentioning that you found
Yeah, I was just in a coffee shop, a vegan coffee shop called Clementine's in Brooklyn, and when my wife and I walked up there, cause we searched it out because we're vegans, so, and just noticed this woman there with your T-shirt. I thought it looked really cool. I thought, oh, it'd be nice to take that back with me to France. We're going back to France tomorrow, and so my wife said, look, I'll talk to her and say, where did you get the T-shirt? And she told me that it was given to her by the band. So then I took a long shot and sent an email just saying, is there any chance you can ship out a T-shirt to me out there? And here you are delivering it by hand. So
yeah, well, it's my pleasure. It's really a pleasure to meet you. You know, I've, you know, especially when I meet a musician, especially someone who has had a career that spans a lot of different eras and has been in the thick of it for much of that. I always like to ask at first where things all started musically. Like if you go back that far to your first musical inspirations, memories.
Well, yeah, it does go back a long way. That's my age. But when I first started playing drums, it was kind of, in the UK, it was what was called the blues explosion thing was happening then. And so I was listening to things like John Mayall, Free, and bands like that, which are blues-based. And
you grew up in where?
In the UK, in the south of England. Okay. So yeah, I was living near a small town called Farnham, and when I went to college, I saw a poster which said blues band need drummer, and at that point I didn't own a drum kit or hadn't used a drum kit, but I'd worked out how to do it. And so I kind of bluffed my way, and I said, well, I'm a bit rusty and I don't have a drum kit, but I'm your man. So they kind of accepted that. And so it was kind of not very organized. We're trying to get rehearsals together. We had a gig in a club organized, but for some reason we never got a rehearsal together. But we ended up in the club, and we all knew what sort of John Mayall stuff, you know, Peter Green and stuff, and so we ended up playing this support band for another band by saying, do you know that, you know, Stepping Out or that tune or this tune? Yeah, okay, and we played it, and at the end of each tune it would be like just general murmur of people thinking, I don't know what we were tuning up or what, but we thought it was a great gig for our first gig. So it's kind of in the deep end. And then after the gig, I said, hey, you know, I owned up that I'd never played the drums before, and they were going, oh, you bastard, you know, but well done, you pulled it off. So it kind of worked out. That's
pretty ballsy. I mean, so before that, obviously, you obviously thought about playing drums. I
thought about playing. I dreamt about it. In my parents' house in the cellar, I used to put on records like Rolling Stones and things like that, and I used my mum's knitting needles on the couch, and you know, having watched sort of Charlie Watts or whoever playing on TV, I kind of emulated what they were doing. So I kind of worked out what to do with my feet and hands before I actually touched the drum kit.
So the first time you touched the drum kit was that gig?
Was a gig, yeah.
And how old were you then?
And it was actually, the drum kit belonged to their previous drummer who decided he didn't want to play anymore, and he wanted to be a DJ. So he said, oh, you can use my kit. So.
And how old were you at that?
Well, I was 17 then, yeah. So not really that young. I started kind of, I'd been wanting to dreaming about being a drummer since about 14, but I was always fascinated with drums. I mean, when I was a child, I was brought up in in Belgrade in Yugoslavia up till about the age of 7. I remember marching bands, and I'd just be fascinated by the kind of snare drums and stuff going on. And when I got to England, my mother remarried, and my stepfather, I remember I had an album with pipe bands on it, which, you know, sort of Scottish pipes, and he came in the room and I was listening to it, and it was really the drums I was kind of listening to, and he says, "That's really unusual at your age that you like you like bagpipe music." And I was like, didn't say I don't really like the bagpipes, it's the drums I'm listening to, you know.
So was there a reason why you didn't get a drum set that whole time, or was it just you just didn't come up, or was there like a restriction?
Yeah, I mean, I was up until then I was going to boarding school, and it's kind of, and there was no music lessons or anything like that. It was kind of very limited, and when I'd be at home, we were living in the middle of the country, so I didn't really meet anyone interested in music or anything until I left school and went to college, and then it kind of all opened up.
So between that first gig on drums and obviously touring the world,
yeah. Well, after that, it's just kind of a number of years where I was in and out of bands that would form and break up, and you'd never make any money. And then, you know, I moved to London where it was all happening, and I played in lots of different bands. But that particular first band, probably it lasted for me about 18 months, I think. And then I got offered to join a couple of friends to go sort of to India on a sort of road trip. And so I kind of just took the opportunity and left the band. And my early claim to fame is that after I left that band, they had Freddie Mercury, who ended up being Queen, as their singer, you know, but that band sort of disbanded as well eventually. And then, I came back from that trip, being away about 8 months, and just started playing with lots of different bands, and then playing some cabaret acts as a band called the Flirtations, who are 3 soul singers from North Carolina. And they'd had a hit in England, top 10 single hit, so they moved to England because they were kind of big fish in a small pond there. And so they did a kind of cabaret circuit, which was happening at that time. So that was a real kind of learning curve for me. And, you know, me and the rest of the band, well, none of us could read music. We were given all this music written down, and luckily the keyboard player could read to an extent, so we'd like slaved over these charts before I kind of auditioned for the band, and managed to squeeze through, pretend we could read. But it was kind of, by doing that, I kind of learnt to read music a bit, so it helped, you know. It's another one going in at the deep end, really.
Did your experience in India inform the music at all? I mean, I noticed there's some Cure stuff that has sitar. Was that at all part of, you know, any connection there? Yeah,
not really. No, I think that's just, that was a long time later. I mean, leading up to the Cure, I was living in London, and I'd taken all this time I wasn't earning any money. It's kind of hand to mouth stuff. I was playing like in a club in North London, just doing weekends, and I'd get paid £10 for 2 nights, which is just about. I was living in a squat, so I wasn't paying rent at the time. But then I got a call. I got a job as a motorbike messenger around London, which is probably the most dangerous job you can take. But then I got a call from a guy I'd done a session with, and he said, "Oh, there's a band called the Thompson Twins who are looking for a drummer." And he thought I'd be suitable, so I auditioned for them. So I ended up touring with them, and it was because of that I happened to be in America at the end of a tour when The Cure turned up on the top tour, and their drummer, Andy Anderson, who sadly just recently died, actually, had to be sent home because he kind of had a breakdown. And so the engineer for the Thompson Twins in the studio was playing bass with them at the time, and he said, "Oh, I know Boris is around. Maybe you can corral him to finish the tour." And when they asked me, I was like, "Oh no, I've just finished the tour. I just want to chill out." But they kind of convinced me, and I went along to the gig with the temporary drummer, and I thought, yeah, this is really what I want to do, because it was Thompson Twins were using a lot of tape. What was in those days was tapes with backing singing and keyboards and stuff. So I was playing along to a click. Yeah, so I was playing along to a click, and it was on tape. Yeah, which would sometimes slow down because it would get too hot. And so it's really refreshing to play with The Cure, which was just kind of so much more freedom. And at the end of the tour, Robert said to me, "Oh, did I want to do the next album?" And at the time, I was kind of that tour was kind of playing kind of small clubs in the States, and Thompson Twins were sort of playing quite big places. They're quite successful. I was getting paid really well, so I was kind of in a quandary whether to, which way to go. And so I thought I'd have a meeting with the Thompson Twins, and really I was kind of thinking, I was more of a hired hand with them, and I was thinking, if they're prepared to sort of give me more input in the band and be a part of it, then maybe I'd do that. But in a way, their manager did me a service, because he said, before you meet the band, they were in Paris at the time, before you meet the band, I want a meeting with you. So I said, okay. So I explained my case, and he said, okay. And then the band arrived, and he said to the band, to the rest of them, so Boris has decided to leave, so we need to get another drummer. I was like, that's not exactly what I said. And I was kind of like, couldn't say anything, so I thought, shit. So I was driving home to London thinking, what happened there? And then the more I thought about it, the more I felt released by the whole thing of not having to make a decision. So I got back, and then we did the Head on the Door album, which ended up being quite well received and sold well. And so then Robert asked me to stay in the band. So it was the right decision. So
they kind of, I want to go back a little bit before, if possible, but at that point, The Cure kind of took off much more at that point?
Yeah, The Head on the Door was probably, up to that point, the biggest selling album. Before that, they were more of a cult band, and had a strong following, but it was, and then Head on the Door tour, we were playing, from playing clubs, we were playing like arenas and stuff, and then after that, it kind of grew more and more. And
well, a lot of people attribute that to your contributions.
Well, I don't know about that. It's probably a mixture, just happened to be Robert's. All of Head on the Door was written by Robert Smith, so some really great songs on it. And after that, we did, the next albums were more co-written together, though Robert would obviously write all the words, but we'd all kind of put music together and meet up, and then we'd have scorecards where we'd give out of 10 marks for each song, and they weren't necessarily songs, they could be just sketches, and then obviously Robert would have to decide which ones we'd go ahead with, because he had to sing on them. So yeah, it worked like that. So it was,
Well, going back a little bit, just to make that gap between, playing drums on a gig that you never played before and playing, arenas for one of the most influential bands, certainly of the decade. What did you spend? Was there a period of time where you spent crazy hours in woodshedding? I'm sure there must have been. And obviously you were playing tons of gigs. Yeah. But there must have been a time that you, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just assuming based on, but that you really bunkered down, and because it's not just that you were playing on such a big level, but you're also your playing is so technically, it's so solid and has so much power. And that obviously it didn't come out of just playing around here and there, hearing a lot for over years.
I suppose, Yeah, I mean, in terms of
your study, you know,
in terms of technique, I wouldn't say I was a technical player. I regard myself as a field player, you know, and kind of comes from the heart, really, more than the head. So, although obviously, you know, I'd work out parts and try and get, you know, some sort of geometry going in my playing. But I mean, there's a period, you know, where I was playing. Actually, I just kind of re-met up with. I hadn't seen a lot of the band for a while. Roger O'Donnell is a keyboard player who I kind of got into the band in the first place, and we used to play. We played in that cabaret outfit, and we played in a kind of jazz fusion band. So during that period, we were, you know, I was in, you know, I bought every Billy Cobham album he made. You know, I was really into working out all his fills and stuff. So in terms of woodshedding, I suppose that period was when I looked at my technique and tried to emulate. You know, I really like things like Mahavishnu Orchestra and bands like that. So that was a period where I kind of looked at technique. And when I joined the Thompson Twins, that period was kind of just, you know, after punk had happened. Right. And it was really looked down on anyone being technically good or anything. You had to sort of hide it, you know. Right. And in a sense, with The Cure, it's the same sort of thing. It was, you know, the whole punk era thing of you know, self-indulgent musicianship was kicked out the door. So that period I did kind of, but I'm not that much of a, you know, I know Jason, who plays with Cure now, he apparently practices like 8 hours a day or something crazy every day. And for me, you know, I've never been like that. You know, I get very bored with just doing. I learn more with playing other musicians. You know. So really, playing live has been mostly your education, mostly. Yeah, I mean, it's a very different approach. I mean, when we were recording, a lot of it would be. I mean, we didn't use click tracks live, but in the studio it was always click tracks. And, you know, some of the time it would be just me and Simon, the bass player, laying down backing tracks with no other instruments, you know. So it was quite kind of clinical in some cases. And we'd obviously play together when we're doing the demos, and then it would be kind of dissected, and that's the way Robert liked it to be, you know. And so yeah, it's a different approach, whereas live, it's kind of more spontaneous in some ways, you know, as spontaneous as you can be. I mean, we would have sections in the songs that weren't, you know, we wouldn't, like if we were playing the song A Forest, there'd be sections in it where it would be quite free for how long it would last, and how, you know, how long there'd be sort of self-indulgent guitar solos. So that whole period, I mean, there was definitely one of the major, besides the synthesizer, kind of digital synthesizers taking over a lot of that sound. Yeah. The drum sounds and a lot of the music you're associated with really was a lot of that, some of the more digital sounding. I know I was just listening to some of your music and your snare sound. I mean, it's a classic 80s. It's like, I don't know, it's a gated, but even when you're playing live, it's this very echoey, sharp sound. How do you, first time I'm very curious as an engineer, just and drummer, how that sound comes about? Is it some of the way you tune your snare, a combination with the... Yeah, I think as you know, being a drummer as well, it's a lot, you know, you could play the same drum kit as somebody else and sound completely different. It's how you play it and how you hit it or something, which is just how you do it, really. But yeah, there is, I mean, when you listen to 80s drum sounds, you can kind of recognize it straight away. And in fact, a lot of it's being used now because it's so popular again. Yeah. I suppose, I mean, I was kind of instinctive about how I tuned my drums. It was just kind of how it sounded, how I liked it to sound, you know, to me, without worrying too much about, you know, exactly, you know, do I want the snare really tight or, you know, really flat? It's just kind of what feels right.
Well, how did it work with a lot of the? I mean, I guess there was electronic drums. I mean, the Thompson Twins was a lot of electronic drums.
Yeah, Thompson Twins was actually, I was playing those Simmons drums, and they're horrendous to play. It would be a real snare drum was the only kind of real drum, and even the bass drum was, and it was just, you know, there's no kind of variation in sensitivity. The
no
kick drum would just be bap, you know, how about, you know, whatever you do, and I used to get frustrated because you couldn't, you know, if I was doing something with the bass drum, there's a little bit more dynamic. Yeah. The softer tones wouldn't come through at all. You know? Right. And also it really played havoc with your wrists because you forget and you still want to hammer away, but they weren't like the rubber pads. They were these kind of hard plastic, shiny black plastic things which had no give in them at all.
So that happens when you know, play a piano with a lot of sensitivity and then play an organ. Right after you like want to hammer it, and you forget to turn up the volume or nothing.
So at least I had cymbals and a snare drum.
Yeah. So a lot of that sound was something that I guess was happening at the time, but obviously a lot of your contribution, because now I'm sitting here with you, and I'm obviously having grown up a little bit in that era of just being. To separate one of the creators of that music from the particular sounds that came out of that era is like, obviously, I don't have a sense of where you came in and adopted some of those sounds that were like happening at the time, or that you contributed to it. I'm sure there's an overlap there.
I think there's an overlap. I mean, you know, I mean, in the studio, obviously, the production is kind of pushing to I mean, the producer would never say, "Oh, can you change the tuning of the drums?" I mean, we tried different things in the studio. For instance, there wouldn't be one drum set. I mean, when we were playing the Kiss Me album, which we recorded in the south of France, we had 3 separate drum kits set up. We had one small drum kit, which was in a little booth, completely soundproofed and absolutely dead, and that was on the single Close to Me, which is kind of that kind of dry, you know, we did the video, which we were all in a wardrobe, you know, that kind of sound. And then we had one of the drum kits in this kind of concrete room on a big kind of riser, and it was so loud, it was just definitely, anyone who came in while I was working out a part would go run out screaming because it was just too much, I mean, too loud. So there's that, and then there was another kit which was just the regular kit I use, which was kind of in a wood room. So we, you know, depending on the song, would be depending on what kit I'd use. So it wouldn't be one drum sound on record, but I suppose live, you know, with the engineers would kind of adapt things according to the songs to, you know, whether it's really gated or whatever, you know.
So I guess there were 4 Cure studio albums that you were majorly part of? Or
yeah.
Which ones do you stand out to you as?
I mean, Kiss Me album was kind of a bit of a grueler because it was a double album, and we probably actually recorded 30 songs or more, and we did. It felt a bit like a production line after a bit because we decided to start off just doing backing tracks. So it was all drums all the time, every day. And I remember after a few weeks, I was doing some cymbal overdubs, and I started getting flashing lights in my eyes, and I was thinking, God, what's going on then? And I'd never had a migraine. I didn't realise that's what it was. Luckily, it was quite early in the evening. It was probably only about 9 or 10, and which for us is really early because we start later and later. But the producer would say, "Oh, why don't we give it, have a break tonight?" And so I kind of went to my bed and sort of lay there, and it got worse until my head started feeling like it was exploding, and it just carried on all night. And then I realised it was a migraine. So I kind of said, "Can we do a few overdubs on those tracks and give you," because it was just too much, one after the other. So that was kind of quite an experience. But I mean, The Head on the Door was the first album I played with them, and it just felt really kind of light doing it. We had so much fun doing it. We were recording in a studio called Angel Studios in North London, and I remember it had a really big playing area. We set up a Scalextric racetrack covering the whole thing. So in breaks, we'd all get up. Everyone would sort of make their cars slightly, different, bending bits or burning bits off and stuff. And so it was kind of a fun album to do. But I suppose Disintegration was the kind of, in a way for me, the deepest experience. It was really involving, We all felt very kind of in there for that. And
were you able to screen out, I guess it probably was, since there were some hits and there might have been record company pressure, did you feel that? Or were you able to as a band, block that out creatively?
We were really lucky in that, I suppose, the arrangement with the record company was that, they weren't allowed to go into the studio while recording, and they accepted that. I suppose we're in a position where, when we signed with them, they accepted that. So we didn't feel pressurized by that, and we, even in terms of how long we were recording in the studio, it was always far too long, really. We were just, spending so much time recording. So we did have the label head, who Chris Parry, who was Fiction Records label head, when we were doing the Kiss Me album in south of France. He was a keen yachtsman, so he decided to he's from New Zealand originally, decided to sail to New Zealand, and he stopped off in the south of France to see how we're getting on. We'd been probably recording for 2 or 3 weeks, and we always kind of playing pranks on him. And anyway, he decided to go and see how so we thought, he's coming up, so we recorded really quickly, like maybe three songs, and made them slightly out of time, out of tune and everything, and sat him down in the studio. And he said, "So how how's it?" And I said, "Well, these are the most kind of complete things we've got." And he'd sit there, trying to keep a smile going, trying to tap his foot to it, going, and then he was like, "Yeah, okay." So, and he was looking more and more worried the more he listened. And eventually we told him. He said, "Oh, you bastards!" So.
By the way. That's probably the meanest thing you could do to
it really is, yeah.
Totally invested in the success of it. So you between playing live and I guess in general, because obviously there's a big chunk of your career was you were in The Cure. Yeah. But you did a lot of other, you did many other projects. When you were in The Cure, were you totally dedicated to The Cure?
I did a few other projects, not really that many. I played with a singer, I don't know how well known she is over here, called Kim Wilde, who had hits, and she had a hit called Kids in America.
Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah. So I didn't record with her, but I did some tours with her in Europe and stuff, which was fun. And I did an album with Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen, and got really friendly with him. We hung out a bit, but I didn't do a lot of outside. While I was in The Cure, I didn't do a lot of outside sessions, really.
Well, it seems like I guess in contrast to what you're saying with the Thompson Twins, that you were hired gun. So really, Robert Smith really created. Was it kind of he that created a more ensemble band feeling with The Cure? Yeah. Were you included also in other contracts and everything like that? You didn't feel like just a hired person? No,
I didn't feel. We didn't. We were kind of in terms of publishing, it was split that Robert would have 50%, which is words and lyrics, same thing, and and the other 50% would be split between all of us for music, which I thought was pretty fair, really, being a drummer.
Yeah.
But the way I worked with Paul Thompson who's now Pearl Thompson, we'd get together at his house and create stuff together. And you know, you were saying about the sort of the idea with the sitars and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of came out of some of the tunes came out of that working with him. So it was kind of it definitely felt like a band ensemble.
So then, the one, if you don't mind me asking, so what happened that you ended up the band continued, obviously.
Yeah, that I ended up leaving. That's a difficult question to answer, really, because I don't fully, have an answer for it. In that, everything was musically and in terms of relationships, I was really happy with it. But I just, something really changed in me where I thought I need to go and be doing something different, and so it was kind of it was difficult to explain at the time. I spoke to Robert and said I wanted to leave, and he said, "Oh, what are you going to do?" And all I could think of saying was, "I want to learn to play tablas." And as it turned out, I did end up taking some lessons from an Indian tabla player who was living in Bristol, and he was a classical player and very strict about only. I wanted to learn all the tricks, all the nice sounds, kind of beats, but he wouldn't let you do that.
He started you from the...
Yeah, you had to sort of recite all the. They don't have written music as such, so anyway, so I did that, but it's difficult to really explain why I left, but I just felt I needed to at the time, kind of.
Did you see was there ever a point where you felt like, I mean, you obviously were involved in a lot of music at that point also. Yeah, well,
I was playing with a band called Shelly Orphan, who was opening for us in America and Europe, and because what happened there was at the end of a tour, they were about to go in the studio, and their drummer, they were signed to Rough Trade Records, and their drummer sort of demanded from the record company, "I won't do the album unless I get paid so much, such and such," and they didn't have that kind of money, or they didn't want to pay that kind of money. In fact, I think Rough Trade were having financial problems at the time, and he said, "I won't do it unless." And so Caroline Crawley and Jem Tail from Shelly Orphan were, "God, what are we going to do?" And I said, "I'll do it." So we hadn't had any rehearsals, and the studio was booked literally 2 days later. So we just turned up there and worked through it in the studio, and it was actually, it worked out well.
So what has been some highlights? What have you been up to musically or otherwise
since then?
Since then, yeah.
Well, it's kind of a pretty small scale. I mean, I play with some musicians. I've got kind of, at the moment, it's kind of 2 bands running in southwest France, but really they're kind of, playing locally. And I still work with Jem Tail from Shelly Orphan. He's writing a new album, and so we're kind of, most of it is being done long distance because he lives in England. So he sends me songs, and I sort of lay drums on and say, "What do you think of that?" And he says, "Try harder." No, it's in, but and then we get together in England with Charlie Jones, bass player, who plays with Goldfrapp, who's a really good bass player, and it's great to play with. And he played on the last Shelly and Orphan album as well. So that's kind of something that's about to happen. We've been having we're supposed to be recording in Italy, and it's fallen through 3 times this studio, so for one reason or another. So, but it's still on the.
But you're active. Obviously, do you play regularly, or you have said 2 different bands?
Yeah, I don't play regularly in terms of playing lots of gigs, but I've got a studio at home, and musicians come and we play and work out stuff, and so I'm doing something with with Greg Weiss from Tilden Krauts and Gabby. It's a new project. I mean, their stuff is kind of, I suppose you call it Americana stuff, and this is not called Tilden Krauts, it's called Krauts, and it's kind of more pop or rock oriented. So we've been just working their songs, you know.
So there's different things you're working on that have yet to be released.
Yeah.
What anything recently that you've done that's been released or that's
not really. No, I've been living quite a sheltered life.
Yeah,
down in,
I mean,
it's,
in the south of France.
Yeah.
I was talking with my wife. We were talking about different places in the world where people feel more ambition or less ambition. Talking about how New York is a place where there's heavy ambition.
Yeah.
There's other places. I can imagine south of France is one of those places where you can just kind of kick back. And,
it's not even South France; it's Southwest France, which is even less ambitious an area. It's very rural. It's kind of all farmland and stuff.
Must be beautiful there.
It is beautiful there. And so yeah, I mean, I was kind of. The other evening after this awards thing, I was talking to Robert, and he was saying, you know, well, you should be doing more. You should be like Budgie from Susie and the Banshees. It's like, you know, and I just said to him, to be quite honest, I'm not really that driven, because the things that opportunities that have come around for me have been where they've just come to me. You know, like I was asked to do this, or asked, you know, people put me forward. I've never been a big one to push me. Look, I want to, you know, you've got to use me. I'm the best or anything, because I just don't feel like that. So,
has there ever been a point in your career earlier where you felt like you had to hustle for gigs, or really it kind of came to you throughout just by doing it and then being asked?
Yeah. I mean, I used to play with this bass player he was the opposite of me. He was really keen. He'd drag me along to auditions, and you'd turn up at some studio, and there'd be a corridor with like 10 drummers all banging away on their knees with their drumsticks, and you'd kind of be in a line in that. And I think we went to one which is Man from Man's Earth band, and it was just, I didn't want to do it anyway, and it was very intimidating. So you go in there, play 2 songs, and then they go next, you know. Yeah.
Well, because I was imagining now that you tell the story, and it's you're just very fortuitous. You happen to be in the right place. When I asked you, there was no. I mean, I guess when you joined the Thompson Twins, they also weren't yet, or were they already had hits? And
well, the Thompson Twins were like they were kind of a 7-piece, kind of semi-hippie band, and then the 3 main people in it decided to break away and become this kind of pop band, you know, 80s, typical 80s pop band, and so. I mean, basically everything was, your drums were programmed, everything was bass was programmed, and keyboards, and so they really wanted a live, you know, drummer, but not too live, no, and
have to keep with the tape.
And so in the studio, the only thing I'd do would be like I'd be overdubbing cymbals and hi-hats just to give it a bit of kind of reality. So yeah. So
just reflect. I mean, that's an amazing thing that you know, because I guess meeting you, if it's your personality, that you kind of go with the flow, and then you end up contributing a lot, but without having. I mean, it's also, I think maybe it parallels your drumming style as well. Like that and it's probably a very good quality for a drummer who's there supportive, but also is adding a lot of texture and adding a lot of
well, I think my drumming style really is kind of a reflection on the music, you know, and that it's not, I haven't just sort of imposed something, it's going to, you know, I do this and it's going to work with the, I mean, with the Cure, what I did with the Cure is different to what I did with the Thompson Twins and what I've done with other bands, because I kind of try and work out what works with it. And I suppose, you know, with The Cure, because when I joined them to start with, to finish the top tour, I was just playing all their back catalogue. So obviously that influenced me as to how to move on, to keep it, you know, keep that thread going throughout. You know,
really finding that balance between your own voice and what's
and
happening
what's gone
around
before,
you.
and what's going on around me, the influence of the songs and how they played. You know, I mean, I think Robert's style of playing guitar is kind of unique, and you know, I play off that a lot. You know, and obviously his vocal style as well.
Have you gotten kind of feedback? I know my wife was kind of telling me about her experience, and I know this has been very common among, let's say, like a certain subsection of teenagers who look to, you know, The Cure as you know, extremely cathartic, you know, got them through difficult times.
Yeah,
I mean, is that something
alone in their bedroom with the lights dimmed, sort of thing. Yeah. So.
Is that something that how do you see that from where you sit and being a creator of that music? Do you meet? I'm sure you meet a lot of people who have been affected by the music. Were you kind of aware of that as it was being created? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, be aware of it because I remember, for instance, you know, when we'd go off on a tour on the tour bus, we'd get a sack full of fan mail, and we'd all be opening letters, and some of it was pretty kind of out there, and that, you know, you get letters written by somebody and it's all written in blood, you know, and because they think that's, oh, you're a goth band, you know, it needs to be like that, you know, but but actually, you know, I think the image of the band was that, you know, we're all kind of quite serious and kind of, you know, reflective on everything, and actually we were like a bunch of kids some of the time, you know, a lot of the time we'd just, you know, be having a laugh.
But did you feel like there was, the music had a certain persona? I mean, you had your personalities, and it sounds like there's a lot of fun, the cars, and, you know, that you could kind of have fun and have a different personality kind of off the stage. But did you feel like having to live up to that, or just kind of was a natural, just the way the band
I think it was natural, and I also think I suppose the music being how it was, although it's difficult to say that the music was dark or anything, because a lot of the single stuff, you know, is quite light, you know. But I suppose some of it's pretty intense, so I think it makes you need something to bounce off that, which is kind of childish humour.
So you're in town now for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah.
So how was that? That was
pretty surreal, actually, on several levels. I mean, I was just reading that Robert's interview sort of went viral and sort of had 8 million views, because this very excited interviewer sort of said, "Oh yeah, this is amazing. Are you as excited as I am?" And he replied, "Apparently not." You know, which I think he got a bit of flack for saying, but I don't think he was being mean. I think he was just being genuine about it. So. And it was kind of surreal in that, for me, you know, I've been out of the band a huge number of years now, you know, more than I was in it, and sort of also to see the band playing, which I've done. I've been to a few gigs, but I kind of, it's, you know, people always ask me. It's the most common question is, you know, do you miss it? And it doesn't actually enter into my mind. So obviously I don't, in the sense of, I don't think, I wish I was doing that. But the only time I get near to that is when I see them play. And I see Jason up there and thinking, I should be up there, you know, especially when they're playing songs that I was, you know, parts that I was playing. But so then to get up on stage to sort of receive the award with, you know, stream of us, 10 members, including the ex-members, you know, up there. It's kind of strange. But I was kind of, I was quite kind of stressed out about the whole process and unsure whether I really wanted to go. And I think at one point Robert and the existing band and Simon, existing band, weren't sure if they were going to go. And I said to Robert, you know, if you don't go, I'm not going to go, because it's going to be really weird, just the ex-members turning up. So anyway, you know, they decided they're going to go, and so we went along with it. So it ended up better than I expected it to be, and with a bonus of being able to stay on in New York and Brooklyn and really sort of have a bit of a visit.
And then I get to meet you in the
and I get a T-shirt.
And you get a T-shirt, the Brooklyn Jazz Warriors T-shirt.
Yeah,
I'm very pleased. Boris, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
this has
you're
been really
welcome.
fantastic.
Yeah. And thanks for the album and the T-shirt. I look forward to listening to it on vinyl. Yeah.
My pleasure. I look forward to whatever music you release, and I wish you a lot of success and health and joy.
Great. Thanks very much.
So a few weeks ago, I was in my studio, nothing extra special going on, and I noticed an email, and I couldn't deal with it right away. The subject line was T-shirt, so I didn't know, maybe it was just some spam email or something. But later, when I looked more carefully at it, it said that I'm in Brooklyn. I saw your band's T-shirt. That's the Brooklyn Jazz Warriors T-shirt. And I'm leaving for France. Could you ship it to me? How much does it cost? I was like, oh, that's cool. So I started to look up how much it costs to ship to France. And I responded, well, I can get the price. But if you're still in Brooklyn, maybe I could bring it by. And the person, by the way, mentioned that this was Boris Williams, ex-drummer from The Cure. So, of course, I know who The Cure is. I've been, I say a casual fan. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. Their music was definitely meaningful to me, but I wouldn't say that I was deeply, deeply into their music then. Certainly, since meeting Boris, I've taken a deeper dive into their music and the lyrics of Robert Smith, as we quoted in the beginning of this episode, which are quite romantic and dark and mysterious. And Boris was a major part of the world of The Cure's music, and he was the drummer from 1984 through 1994, which was kind of a really important part of the band's history. They made some of their greatest albums, their biggest hits, and music that's really resonated over the years. And Boris contacted me. He happened to be in town for the induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which included current band members and past band members. And the impression I got from Boris was there's really kind of like a family atmosphere with this band, unlike some other bands who have differences of opinion and band members cycle in and out. It really seems like the members that have been, while they're in the band, they have really a very strong stake in the band. And even when they leave the band, they're still really a part of the band. So it was really appropriate that all the band members, past and present, were inducted in this recent Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony. So it turned out that Boris was still in Brooklyn, and I was able to stop by and meet him, bring him a T-shirt. I brought him also a vinyl copy of a Brooklyn Jazz Warriors album, and we were able to sit down and have a really nice conversation. I mean, he's a really stand-up guy. He was really kind and generous with his time and sharing of his experiences. It's not every day you get to meet someone whose music has had an impact in such a major way on so many people. And I've known people over the years who've been extremely impacted by The Cure's music and his drumming, which is so intense. And the music itself is powerful and humorous and has a lot of joy to it as well, even within the darkness. It's a really beautiful mixture. It's also just really rocking. So it's been a real privilege to have met Boris, and through the course of our conversation, he shares a really unique and interesting story. I mean, a lot of where he came from and how he got to where he is really a tale of being in the right place at the right time with the right personality and the right skills. And, in contrast to some other interviews that we've had recently where the theme has been how much skill one could develop to grow as a musician, I feel Boris's story really shines a light on such an important element of a certain kind of faith in the process and in the flow. I mean, his first gig that he played in public with a legit blues band, he had never actually sat at the drums before. And somehow, through his mental practice that he'd done before and through just his fearless attitude, he was able to convince people that he actually had played drums before successfully. And that led from one thing to another until ultimately he was in one of the great and impactful bands of rock and roll history. This podcast and all of our podcasts and Sound Heights Records music releases are supported and made free of charge by our wonderful patrons. You can join them if you go to soundheightsrecords.com. There's a link to the Patreon page there.